to the third item, the meeting with MDE Secretary Ben Grumbles. The reason I'm dressed like this is because I basically spent really my whole day basically driving to Baltimore and MDE's headquarters with both Bill Ingersoll and Bob Sipes. We met with the Secretary of MDE, Ben Grumbles, for about an hour. He also had, I would say, probably 7 lieutenants, including a couple of lawyers, Chris Ralston and Horatio Tablata, who had been in town and met with us, both here at Town Hall and at a public meeting that they came and held with us. And it was really a meeting that I had requested a couple of times, but in writing, really the purpose of the meeting was for us to express directly to the Secretary our continued concerns over the procedures that are being implemented at the hospital, but even more than what's going on right now is what would happen in the event that these contaminants escaped from the zone of hydraulic control, and ultimately if this somehow gets to a closeout and the hospital basically is given a closeout, what happens from that point on? How do we get assurances that, I think even MDE would say that there would still be some oil in the ground no matter what we do. How do we know for sure that that isn't going to move eventually? We kind of went over the history of the spill. For those of you who don't know, the spill was first discovered in 1987, so this has been going on for almost 30 years. Unfortunately, the town wasn't notified of the spill for 4 years. We didn't find out that this was even going on until 1991. We kind of threw that out there to sort of express why we're a little bit distrustful of really both MDE and the hospital at this point. When we were notified, we were immediately told that we needed to shut down well number 8, which is one of our most productive wells, which was never brought back online, for which we never received any compensation. And we also talked briefly about how the pump and treat system was completely shut off for almost a year in 2011, and that we were never notified of that. So that kind of set the backdrop. And I will say the Secretary Grumbles, I thought, was very receptive to our concerns. He was very empathetic about, our position and why we were, sort of hesitant to really believe almost anything that anybody says, and that we wanted to safeguard our population. I will say nothing really came out of it on paper from this meeting, but he did say that they would consider and continue to discuss the possibility of creating a consent agreement. Really, if we were to get a consent agreement that would be signed by the town, the hospital, and MDE, what we would want, first of all, is this really would be in the event of, first of all, we talked about what would happen in the event of a closeout. How do we know that that stuff isn't going to move? And we talked about wanting to hold the hospital's feet to the fire if that gets closed out, to continue testing. We'd said for 10 years. They were talking about 1 to 2 years. Then they said, well, there's a site where we required them to test for another 8 years. And I said, well, to me, it should be longer than that, because it's such a unique spill in that it was a tremendously large spill, and it's so close to our drinking water supply. And to me, that makes this different from a spill in the middle of a flat area where there's a farm field and you're miles from any water supply. So he was empathetic to that, and then I said, the other thing we really want is financial assurances that if the hospital, if we find contaminants in our well and we have to go to a doomsday scenario where we need new wells, we want to know that there's money that's going to be on the table for us. We want to know where it's coming from and how we can get it. So we kind of left it that they would continue to have internal discussions, and we basically asked them to broker this agreement between the 3 parties, and we'll see what happens. I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said.
I think that bringing the history, we went back, went through the files which we kept from 1988 on, and some of the meetings sounded similar to the meeting today. So, that sort of points out that why we're having another meeting, because they admitted it was their responsibility to protect the town's well fields in 1991. in a letter to us, and it's same is true today. It doesn't matter how much they spent or how much has been removed from the ground. There's one thing we know, and we may argue over how many gallons are still in the ground. We know there's gallons in the ground.
I get the sense that if the consent agreement is gonna happen, there's gonna have to be another meeting where we sit down with all three parties and basically try to get everyone to agree on some terms that we're all comfortable with. And I think the terms that would be debated would be how, assuming this, and they kept emphasizing this is really, we're really early in this stage of the remediation. I was like, I understand that, but I'd rather be hysterical now than after we find out that our wells can't, serve the town. Being preemptively, prudent right now. And I think the things that would really need to be negotiated would be how long after a potential closeout would testing have to go on? And it should all be paid for by the hospital, in our view, even though they seem to indicate that wouldn't necessarily be a legal requirement of the hospital if MDE gave them their blessing to close out the site, which to me is kind of incredible, but that's something that we would need to fight for. And then I think the other thing is, where's the money gonna come from if, it all goes awry?